Around the world, the royal family is the ultimate symbol of Great Britain. Whereas once monarchs left the country to wage wars, now they go to build allies and represent the nation.
Often you do see these very important people, heads of state, the presidents, the prime ministers, starstruck by meeting the royals.
It's on royal tours that we can see their true power.
I think it's fairly obvious to everybody across the world what the key issues are.
They still have a huge amount of influence. I don't think people in the UK really realise how big the royal family is around the world.
But it's on these tours that we also gain the rarest of insights.
When you're overseas with them, you get a little bit more of an idea of what makes them tick.
You are getting an insight into their private lives. They're just like the rest of us. They grieve, they love, they get angry, they get sad.
With their every move caught on film, we're able to see what's really going on with the royals.
It's fascinating to watch the royals at such close quarters, those moments when the mask slips.
I haven't yet worked out a method of splitting my wife in half.
From the emotional moments.
When Britannia was decommissioned, it was incredibly emotional for them, and the Queen appeared to wipe a tear from her eye.
And those of high drama.
Despite the level of security, things can still go wrong.
You don't know if there's somebody in that crowd who has bad intentions.
My eyeballs are bleeding.
To the characters changing the royal family forever.
Princess Diana really revolutionised what people expect of a royal.
Because I'm not a political figure, I am a humanitarian figure.
That was Diana. She was courageous. She'd use her celebrity.
With experience of hundreds of royal tours, we hear the inside story from those who have travelled with the royals as they reveal
we need to change sides.
the secrets of the royal tours. October 2019, William and Kate arrive in Pakistan for another royal tour. It's the first trip by a royal to the country in 12 years. And seen as vital for continuing good relations between nations with strong historical links.
I think it is the most important ambassadorial role for any member of the royal family to be sent overseas to represent the Queen and country.
Certainly when you talk to people from the Foreign Office, they say that sending royals abroad is one of the most important things that we can do.
Prince William is part of the new generation representing Great Britain on royal tours and following in the footsteps of his family. His mother, Diana, visited Pakistan 3 times in the 90s. She was friends with Imran Khan, who 22 years later, William met as the country's prime minister.
I told you that I would one day succeed. I realized it would take me 22 years.
William's grandmother, the Queen, visited Pakistan twice, the first time in 1961.
Karachi pelted the royal car with rose petals at the start of the visit to Pakistan.
But for this latest tour in Pakistan, it's hard to recreate such scenes. This is one of the most complex royal tours of recent times, with security a big concern.
I've spoken to aides who have done recce's, and often at least 2 recce's will go into an overseas trip.
Massive security issues around that, but diplomatically very important for the rest of the world to see that, a future king is going to Pakistan and, it's a great country, it's worth investing in and it's worth going to.
A key detail for the royals, wherever they go, are the cultural sensitivities they need to respect in each country.
Certain countries you've got to abide by their customs, head covering if you go to a Muslim country.
You do have to be careful, particularly for the women, in the way that you dress. When Kate was in Kuala Lumpur, she visited a mosque, and obviously you have to be quite, aware of the places that you're visiting, dress appropriately. Are you going to have to take your shoes off? Kate and William had to take their shoes off when we visited Gandhi's house in Delhi, so we're all kind of obsessed with looking at Kate's feet.
William and Kate were following a path previously trodden by the Queen. who over her decades of travelling the world hasn't been exempt from following local customs.
For the Queen, the High Commission had thoughtfully provided British Airways slipperettes.
She's very, very careful to be exactly what is expected of her. You have to bow to the customs of the country because that is polite. And there's no point going somewhere and not being polite.
But while the royals are always at pains to follow the correct procedure everywhere they go, the usual protocols around how you treat the royal family can go awry when they're overseas.
These pupils were too young to understand royal protocol, and fascinated by their important visitor, little girls competed for his attention.
Sometimes, though, it can lead to charming moments.
One child grasped his hand and refused to leave his side. They didn't want to see him go.
For over 20 years, Paul Burrell toured the world with the royals. He witnessed the lengths they'd go to limit any embarrassment if the right etiquette wasn't followed.
In the South Pacific, we had a Tongan prince who came on board for the state banquet. And right at the end of the meal, everyone is presented with a dessert plate and a bowl of water to wash your fingers. The Tongan prince was putting each piece of fruit inside his water dish, poured the cream and sugar inside the dish too. And as he lifted this soup fruit to his lips, he caught the Queen's eye and realized he was the only person on the table doing it. Embarrassed by his faux pas, he put his dish down, and the Queen looked and smiled, picked up her dish and took a sip from her water. Now that is class.
There is one thing the Queen can't stand, though, and it led to her trip to Morocco in 1980 being dubbed the Tour of Hell.
The king was notoriously tardy about punctuality, and he didn't turn up, and he was hours late for the Queen, and the Queen had to wait. I mean, she kept up a fantastic expression, but we learned later that she was absolutely furious that she'd been kept waiting all this time. I mean, it's not because she feels that it's disrespectful to her, but, you know, she's got a full day of engagements. It meant that everything ran late, and it meant that the Queen was going to keep other people late, and that was her concern.
Whatever the stresses and strains of royal tours, for years the royals had the comfort of travelling in their own little part of Britain, the royal yacht Britannia.
That was the Queen's favourite mode of transport, and while she might have been hundreds of thousands of miles away from Balmoral or Sandringham or Windsor, actually Britannia had become a second home, a home on the seas, and she used to love travelling on the yacht.
It's always an exciting moment to board a ship, of course. How much more so when it's the first time and when it's the Royal Yacht Britannia and a real voyage of exploration and discovery lies ahead.
Her maiden voyage in 1954 saw her carry Princess Anne and Prince Charles to Tobruk to meet the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh at the end of their 6-month Commonwealth tour. 1 month later, returning to London, Britannia and its royal passengers had a spectacular welcome.
They sailed up the Thames, and it was a huge fanfare, and Tower Bridge opened, and people were screaming and cheering and welcoming them home.
All are gathered to greet the young Queen and her husband and to say, with the nation, welcome back.
For 43 years, she sailed round the globe, travelling more than 1 million nautical miles, calling at over 600 ports in 135 countries.
I particularly loved travelling on board the Royal Yacht Britannia.
Former footman to the Queen, Paul Burrell, experienced what it was like on board.
Royal Yacht Britannia was a kind of country house floating in a foreign sea. And Britannia, for the Queen, was home away from home. If you ever visit Britannia, you will see how humble it is in many respects. Of course, the Queen slept in a single bed. Prince Philip had his own quarters. But the Queen loved Britannia because of the camaraderie on board. She loved the fact that everybody was working for her and working for that excellence in foreign countries. Whenever the Queen arrived, everything was perfect. We all made sure that we did our best.
With all the gifts the Queen received on tour, Britannia could end up looking like a treasure ship.
I was in the Gulf states with the Queen. We visited Kuwait, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, and Oman. It's very interesting to watch sultans from other countries and how they communicate with the Queen. They're almost in reverence of the Queen. And I remember floating around the Gulf on board Britannia, and each state tried to outdo the next with gifts. The Queen was given sapphires, emeralds and pearls, a golden falcon studded with rubies, beautiful golden palm trees with rubies hanging from them as dates, with camels on lapis lazuli. You should have seen the treasure that came back from the Gulf. It was quite amazing.
Britannia was the scene of many important gatherings down the years.
President of Gambia and Lady Jawara.
A place the Queen could host even when she was on tour. And it was somewhere the royals could use their brand of diplomacy.
Britannia was a statement of Great Britain, because it wasn't just used by the royal family. It was used by the government and ministers, and it was used to host parties. And every time they got to a new country, Britannia would be there on the dockside as a symbol of Great Britain.
While Britannia played its role in historic world events like the handover of Hong Kong to China in 1997, it's perhaps best remembered for the more intimate family moments.
Prince William tried a small wave.
In 1985 in Venice, Prince Harry made one of his first public appearances.
Prince Harry was cheerfully unaware of the fuss.
Although Prince William stole the limelight.
And then Prince William produced the two-handed version of the wave, which happens to be the very Italian way of saying ciao.
After 44 years sailing the royals across the world, in 1997, Britannia was decommissioned.
Piped aboard for the final time, the Queen and Duke of Edinburgh came to say goodbye to a yacht whose royal duties spanned nearly half a century.
When she was decommissioned, I think the royal family were very, very sad. A lot of people were very sad. And the Queen actually said, it was the only time really in my year that I can totally relax is when I'm on board Britannia. And it was incredibly emotional for them. And the Queen appeared to wipe a tear from her eye.
For decades, the Queen and her family have travelled the world, representing the country and giving us some insight into their lives. But in that time, their tours have sometimes been controversial, and they face danger as high-profile targets. There aren't many countries in the world the royal family haven't visited. The Queen alone has made over 270 foreign trips, travelling over 1 million miles. Wherever the royals travel, they usually have some interesting experiences.
Prince Charles was treated to what his host described as a bit of local culture. As the entertainers gyrated in front of him, he seemed amused, if slightly embarrassed.
But while they can seem like a never-ending procession of walkabouts and polite exchanges, royal tours have often been groundbreaking.
There's no free press in communist Cuba, and no royal has ever been here on a formal visit before today.
In March 2019, Prince Charles travelled with the Duchess of Cornwall to a former Cold War enemy, Cuba, as Britain looks to improve relations.
You can't rewrite history, but you can move forward with the present. And all these visits, incredibly important, not just for the country that's being visited, but for the United Kingdom in its relationship with the rest of the world.
The Queen has led the way with landmark tours that once would have been unthinkable. In 1986, she became the first British monarch to visit China.
The Queen very lighted the climb. She walked 3 times as far as the planners had allowed for and wasn't the least bit puffed at the end.
Going to China was a landmark tour. Had never been a visit by a British monarch to China. It was diplomatically right, and the UK wanted to increase its trade with that particular country.
By now, the Queen was almost at the end of her chosen distance. She looked over the ramparts.
I will never forget walking behind the Queen on the Great Wall of China because she was wearing purple. And I remember purple is such a regal colour. And that was the right colour for her to wear at such an iconic site.
At the end, she was thoughtful, as most of us are, confronted by the grandeur, the scale, the beautiful defiance of the Great Wall of China.
She was quite moved by that, to stand on it. I mean, I felt immense power standing on the Great Wall. I never believed in my lifetime that I would ever get to it, so I was very fortunate to get to it.
In 1994, the Queen similarly made history when, after the disintegration of the Soviet Union, she visited Russia, even staying at the Kremlin.
The royal couple advanced towards their host inside what was once the headquarters of the Soviet Cold War enemy.
Going to Russia was important. Russia had dropped its mantle of Soviet Union. It was important that she went. She was feted by Boris Yeltsin. Probably Boris a bit over the top.
It was a moment for the Queen to savour, a moment when history was made.
Such royal tours can be seen as a way of Britain offering the hand of friendship after years of tension. In 1999, Prince Charles travelled to Argentina, the first visit by a royal since the Falklands War.
I pray that this visit of mine will help, in at least a modest way, to show the people of Argentina the commitment which the British people have made to this process.
Despite these words, there were still those in Argentina who were against such a royal visit. Closer to home, the Queen made one of her most important royal tours in 2011.
The most special tour for me was the Queen's visit to the Republic of Ireland in 2011. Because it meant so much to her, and it meant so much to the people of Ireland that, you know, for years and years she couldn't actually go. And finally she got to go.
As the first British monarch to visit Ireland in a century, it was seen as a historic tour of reconciliation.
It was very important symbolically. Obviously, they're our nearest neighbours. Obviously, we're linked in so many ways, and there have been problems over the years. But I think that was a real privilege to do that one.
Of course, such a visit will still face some hostility. But wherever the royals go, they've always been high-profile targets for protesters. It makes security the #1 concern on any royal tour.
The Queen says, "I have to be seen to be believed," and that has been part of royal processions over the centuries. She invented the walkabout, which, you know, gives the security detail sleepless nights, but she will, and her son and her children and her grandchildren will go and meet people in the crowd.
Superintendent John McLean, the Prince's personal detective, has the most nerve-wracking role, particularly during walkabouts when his boss is most exposed to danger. His whole body is in constant movement, bringing about the dance of the anxious policeman.
The walkabout is the twitchiest moment for the bodyguards because you don't know if there's somebody in that crowd who has bad intentions.
Ken Worf was a royal protection officer for over 15 years. For 6 of them, he was Princess Diana's personal bodyguard, and he went on many royal tours overseas.
The success of any tour is the real groundwork of the reconnaissance. You know, building up relationships with your counterpart, understanding, you know, what the likely threats are going to be, and letting them know that in Diana's case, she's quite tactile, so she will want to shake hands with people, and you say, is that going to be okay? Are we going to be able to screen individuals? And are we able to remove people that are likely to become either offended because of her easygoing, or are there any known activists here that are going to take opportunity of her behaviour?
Each tour has always had a range of security precautions in place, including divers checking the royal yacht Britannia.
There's always an evacuation procedure attached to any location in case something like that goes wrong. So you build up a series of safe houses whereby that if something were to go horrendous wrong, then of course we need to know where the hospitals were, where this safe house was, could we go back and so forth. So all those things are well researched and well practiced. And in the early days, of course, we used to take a doctor with us. One had to be careful about if there were to be a blood transfusion, are we going to make sure we get the right blood? So we used to take a doctor and our own refrigerator full of blood, and everybody on tour, his or her blood group will be known to that travelling doctor.
For the Queen, there have been a number of times she's travelled to parts of the world with security concerns. Perhaps none more than when she went to Jordan in 1984 and met King Hussein, a man who'd survived 12 assassination attempts.
There was a lot of controversy and questions as to whether the Queen should be going to Jordan, given the number of assassination attempts on King Hussein.
Ahead of her lay 5 days of tightly controlled movements, of high-speed journeys in bulletproof cars, of seeing men with guns virtually every waking moment.
But the Queen is quite pragmatic about these things, that if something can be done, it's going to be done. Then you go ahead with the visit.
Fortunately, the tour was a success and passed without incident. 2 years later, however, during a trip to New Zealand, there was an attack.
3 eggs were thrown by 2 girls wearing stewards' white coats. They were quickly seized, but security had failed.
Luckily, only eggs were thrown by activists protesting about Maori rights.
It's one of those events that is what we call a soft-hearted attack. It's embarrassing because what happens, of course, is that when the press get hold of it, they're very critical of the protectors. And so it's always a learning curve. But to be honest, there's not a great deal you can do about it. And you just hope that it isn't a stone, and you deal with it. Despite the level of security and despite the rigor of a good reconnaissance, things can still go wrong. And, if it does, you just have to rely on your own protection team and your gut instincts.
However much they plan, it seems royal tours can have their unpredictable moments. Down the years, many of these have been caught on film. It's when things go wrong that royal tours can really come alive. Royal tours are carefully scripted performances designed to show off the House of Windsor to the greatest advantage.
There is something about the glamour of the House of Windsor which exceeds any other royal house in the world.
There's more written about them than any of the other European royals. I mean, now that we have social media, we know an awful lot more about the European royalty, but they seem pretty dull compared to our family. And people love to read about the dramas and the weddings and the babies and the scandals and the things they will do and the things they won't do. They just love to read about it. So when there's an opportunity to see them, people are really interested.
With the unrelenting attention of the press, the pressure to put on a perfect show is enormous. But over the more than 400 royal tours in the last 70 years, it's the human moments that seem to have the most appeal.
Sometimes things don't run to plan, and actually, when things go wrong or when they don't run to plan, that can actually be the best bit of any royal tour, both for the press, because obviously we love a good story, but the royals love it too, because for them, this very strict timetable can be quite although it's quite comforting and you know where you've got to be and everything's timed and you're in the car at this time and out the car at that time and on the plane, etc. When things go wrong, they love it. You can sometimes see if something goes wrong or someone's not quite where they should be, they look at each other and they're trying not to laugh or just catch each other's eye and there's a little smile and they're like, okay, we're just going to go with this. I remember in Canada in 2016, we were at a food fair up in the north of Canada. It was a lovely occasion. We were outside, the weather was great. It was a sort of food and wine festival. And suddenly, we saw this mollusk. It's a Canadian speciality called Juduck. It's called, the nickname is a phallic clam. It's this clam that the mollusk comes out of, and it does look quite phallic. So obviously, we were all hoping that William and Kate would go over to this particular stall and would go and have a look at this phallic clam because we thought it'd be quite funny. And to give William and Kate their due, they were very game. They played along. But to everyone's surprise, suddenly, the guy behind the stall suddenly offered up this Juduck that had been cooked, sautéed with some lovely herbs, and offered it up for them to eat. And William said, oh, lovely, I'll try this. Darling, would you like to have a bit? Kate tried very hard to not pull a face. And we were all sniggering in the background, but bless Kate, she did try it. She obviously thought it tasted disgusting, but she kept a straight face and said, isn't that lovely?
It's fascinating to watch the royals at such close quarters and to get to see how they interact and, those moments when the mask slips, that's all fascinating. But it's also very interesting to see how the heads of state, the presidents, the prime ministers are who the royals are meeting.
How you doing, buddy? You doing okay?
In 2007, the Queen made her 4th state visit to Washington, and even the president got a little flustered.
You helped our nation celebrate its bicentennial in 1976. She gave me a look that only a mother could give a child.
Tours are very carefully stage managed. They're very controlled by the palace. It's why those unscripted moments, the spontaneous moments, always seem to make the biggest stories because they're not what we expected.
Meeting a royal in the flesh can be overwhelming, but the royals have proven deft at the human moments that help break the ice. Charles and Diana visited Hungary in 1990.
When we went there, the president was not even the president, he was the president-elect, Arpad Gons. And he was quite nervous, and Mrs. Gons was quite nervous at sort of having come out of the shadows of communism. All of a sudden they're in the free world and you've got this famous couple arriving. There's a wonderful moment when the Prince of Wales was inspecting the Guard of Honour with President Gons and Diana standing next to Mrs. Gons. Clearly, Mrs. Gons is quite nervous and Diana holds her hand just to calm her nerves.
You are returning to your rightful place at the heart of a Europe which has been denied your presence for far too long. We join you in a determination to ensure that conflict and division never return to our continent.
The days when kings and queens possessed hard power are over, but they still have a huge amount of soft power and influence. And, I don't think people in the UK really realise how big the royal family is around the world. They are still big news wherever you go, even in countries that have got rid of their royal families.
I always remember Prince Harry when he was in Jamaica meeting the Prime Minister, Portia Simpson-Miller, a Republican, by the way, who just seemed to melt in Harry's presence. She was like starstruck, there was a big hug, there was a kiss for Harry. It was like they were best friends. Well, my goodness, the British government must have just been patting itself on its back for deciding to send Harry to Jamaica.
Having Harry in Jamaica at this time is a reason for the youths, the tomorrow people, that's going to be the leaders. It's excellent. So we're proud to have him, and his energy is so great.
If I had a pen, I'd ask you to sign my check.
I know.
From rubbing shoulders with musical royalty to the more formal environments of state visits, some of Britain's most important international relationships are built on royal tours.
It puts monarchs from different countries together and in a very sort of intimate and private way.
The Prince's first engagement was to call on the ruler of Bahrain. Their conversation turned to a subject very dear to Prince Charles's heart, his grandmother, the Queen Mother.
With her operation on her hip,
she's
completely
okay.
revolutionary.
Yes.
Completely. And now she's back to dancing again.
Is she?
Yes. Scottish dancing.
Yeah.
And couldn't stop.
Yeah.
She's a phenomenon.
Yeah.
It's quite different, I think, sending a member of the royal family to, say, somewhere like the Middle East, which have their own royal families as well. They can talk on a level that perhaps even our Prime Minister or our Foreign Secretary can't reach, because that kind of level of respect is, you know, an equal talking to an equal, whereas, frankly, a Prime Minister is viewed as somewhat, you know, below. So I do think that having a royal family is...
Her nerves.
You are returning to your rightful place at the heart of a Europe which has been denied your presence for far too long. We join you in a determination to ensure that conflict and division never return to our continent.
The days when kings and queens possessed hard power are over, but they still have a huge amount of soft power and influence. And, you know, I don't think people in the UK really realise how big the royal family is around the world. They are still big news wherever you go, even in countries that have got rid of their royal families.
I always remember Prince Harry when he was in Jamaica meeting the Prime Minister, Portia Simpson-Miller, a Republican, by the way, who just seemed to melt in Harry's presence. You know, she was like starstruck, there was a big hug, there was a kiss for Harry. It was like they were best friends. Well, my goodness, the British government must have just been patting itself on its back for deciding to send Harry to Jamaica.
Having Harry in Jamaica this time is a reason for the youth, the tomorrow people that's going to be the leaders, is excellent. So we're proud to have him, and his energy is so great.
If I had a pen, I'd ask him to sign my check.
From rubbing shoulders with musical royalty to the more formal environments of state visits, some of Britain's most important international relationships are built on royal tours.
It puts monarchs from different countries together and in a very sort of intimate and private way.
The Prince's first engagement was to call on the ruler of Bahrain. Their conversation turned to a subject very dear to Prince Charles's heart, his grandmother, the Queen Mother.
Her operation on her hip,
she's
completely revolutionary.
Yes.
Completely. And now she's back to dancing again.
Is she?
Scottish dancing.
Yeah.
And couldn't stop.
Yeah.
She's a phenomenon.
Yeah.
It's quite different, I think, sending a member of the royal family to, say, somewhere like the Middle East, which have their own royal families as well. They can talk on a level that perhaps even our Prime Minister or our Foreign Secretary can't reach, because that kind of level of respect is, you know, an equal talking to an equal, whereas, frankly, a Prime Minister is viewed as somewhat, you know, below. So I do think that having a royal family is of benefit to Britain.
Those countries get on better with other monarchs or members of the royal family than they would do with other envoys who might go on their behalf. So they've been very important in smoothing the diplomacy between the UK and those areas.
For all their diplomatic efforts, the royals know it's the press that can make or break a tour, and that relationship requires constant attention.
It's no secret that the relationship between the media and the royal family is fractious at times, tenuous. It's not always a bed of roses, I think it's fair to say. On royal tours, you get, I think, more cooperation and collaboration probably than at any other time. And I think that's quite simply because they want the tour to be a success. They need that oxygen of publicity. They need the media to be behind it.
Despite their rocky history, relations with the media aren't always antagonistic, and it's the press that have set up some of the royals' most memorable photo ops. Charles had one of his famous Kodak moments in Australia in 1979.
I remember it. I wasn't on that tour. It was in Australia in about 1980. It was before he was engaged to Lady Diana Spencer. But there was a huge amount of interest in, he was known as Action Man Charles in those days. He was always throwing himself out of aeroplanes, parachuting or diving. And he was an enthusiast for anything. And one of the things he did like doing when he was in Australia was swimming. I'm not sure just how coincidental it was that the young lady concerned who threw herself around him and got that great picture of him, that surprised Prince Charles as he emerged from the waves, had actually been put up to it by the travelling photographers.
You can't stage the Prince of Wales coming out of the water on a beach, crowded beach, and a girl coming out of the water on a crowded beach, running up to him, flinging her arms around him and giving him a peck on the cheek. Can't stage that. That was a spontaneous movement.
Arthur was one of the travelling photographers on that royal tour and has a slightly different version.
We just hired a model and in a bikini, I think, and just asked her to run into the surf with him, and she did. And of course, he that real handsome guy, and he looked good in a bathing suit, and he's running out and he's wet and he's laughing and they're running along the beach, and that was it. It wasn't a big deal. I didn't think it was.
It was a great image for Charles, and there was a very manly picture of him. And, I think it did his PR and his image a huge amount of good.
On the one hand, you could argue that these royal tours are just a pretty picture, but I do think they have a huge positive impact.
The face-to-face relationships built on royal tours have become a crucial part of modern royal life. But for the new generation of royals, they have also become an opportunity to pursue a more personal agenda.
One of the things you get to see on royal tours is the royals at such close quarters. You get to know what they enjoy doing, and I think you get to have a better understanding of the people rather than the royals that they are.
Royal tours date back more than 100 years to the reign of George V. Modern travel has enabled every royal since to tour abroad on behalf of Britain.
The royal family's always gone on tour. The famous saying is, I have to be seen to be believed. They've done it domestically and they've done it internationally now in the jet set age as well. And it's about promoting the brand of the royal family. It's the biggest royal family in the world.
This is the moment everyone's been waiting for. One of the things that you really see on these tours is that it is about cementing and securing those ties that date back to those early years of the Queen's reign, when she gave up 6 months of her life and left her family to go and forge those connections. It's about making sure that those continue for the decades to come.
One by one, the chiefs were presented to Her Majesty and to the Duke. Certainly a memorable and most impressive event during the royal tour of Ceylon, that land of ancient civilization and strong tradition.
I do think the Queen and the way she has done royal tours has set the blueprint. But I think with the younger royals, we see their interests coming in a bit more.
Harry and William's joint tour in 2010 gave a first indication of how the brothers would seek to rebrand the image of the royals abroad.
I travelled with William and Harry on their first joint overseas tour to Africa in 2010. It had been Harry's idea. He wanted to take his brother to go and show him all the work that he was doing in Lesotho. And it was an amazing opportunity to see the brothers interact.
An 8-foot rock python was ceremonially draped across the shoulders of the second and third in line to the throne. Not venomous, but still worth using to scare your older brother.
It was fascinating to see the dynamic between the two of them and the camaraderie between the two of them. At points, rivalry too. There's always the competitive element, I think, between William and Harry. But they were such a tight unit. They gave interviews, they spoke to the press, and they put the charities that they were wanting to highlight on the map. But really, it was about the boys. It was about the work that Harry was doing, and it was about him showing William his his charity and everything that he had achieved.
That tour had a profound effect on both brothers. Since then, they have made more than 90 official trips abroad, reshaping the tours to focus less on royal pageantry and more on their charity work.
What William and Harry have developed is, yes, the public tour, the tour we all see about, and then the private trips they make behind the scenes. And they do quite a few of those that, we don't get to cover. Harry has spent weeks and weeks in Africa directly working on conservation projects against the illegal wildlife trade. So that then feeds into what they want to do publicly. That is what's developing with both William and Harry. They want to do less in terms of spreading themselves thinly. They want to target what they're doing and do it, in their view, properly.
Like his mother, Princess Diana, Harry's high-profile tours have focused on humanitarian issues.
Harry, probably more like his mother in his approach to things, but he's developed his own personality. He is his own man.
He likes to meet the kind of dispossessed, the people who need help, and he wants to understand the social needs of the country that he's visiting, because he genuinely thinks that he can help and he can make a difference. But the only way to do that is to visit the townships in South Africa, go to the favelas in South America, visit the slums in Asia. And he realises, William, all the members of the royal family, but in particular, I would say William and Harry, realise they have very privileged positions, but also realise that most of the world is very, very different and the people live very, very differently from them.
Prince Harry's recent tour has also given us a glimpse of what royal tours might look like in the future.
Harry and Meghan's tour to Southern Africa, I think, is really key because they're getting rid of a lot of what some people might think are the boring sides to a royal tour, and they're pursuing precisely what they want to promote. For example, the youth charities, the mental health side of things.
I think most of the stigmas around mental illness, right? We need to separate the two. Mental health, which is every single one of us, and then mental illness, which could be every single one of us. But I think they need to be separated because the mental health element touches on so much of what we're exposed to, these experiences that these kids and every single one of us has been through. Everyone has experienced trauma or will likely experience trauma at some point during their lives. We need to try and...
They have done things in their own way. The Duchess has stayed in Cape Town, doing the sort of things that interest her, but with very much an NGO base to it.
It was clear this was a different royal tour. There was no red carpet welcome, there was no official reception, there was no visit to the War Memorial. They went straight to a township on the outskirts of Cape Town. That speech that Meghan made really made a massive impact.
I'm here with my husband as a member of the royal family. I want you to know that for me, I am here with you as a mother, as a wife, as a woman of color, and as your sister.
If you needed to show how the royal family has changed, that's it.
And Harry's vision of a modern royal tour seems to have struck a chord.
This was a really important tour because it came at a time when the Sussexes, who'd enjoyed so much popularity around their wedding, were suddenly in firefighting mode. There were so many negative headlines. So it was a really important moment for them to turn things around and show what they do best. That Sussex star appeal.
Both brothers have remodelled the royal tour, though for the king in waiting, a more symbolic approach is still needed.
For William and Kate, it is a little bit more formal. There are definitely some of Diana's charities that William is promoting when he goes on the royal tours, but he is going to have to do more of the dull stuff on a royal tour, the diplomacy, the trade missions.
As a future King of England and leader of the Commonwealth, William has expanded the royal tour to showcase Britain's relationship with its diplomatic allies.
I think the recent tour of Kate and William to Pakistan shows how important that kind of soft diplomacy is.
It sends out a strong signal to the rest of the world that this is a country on the mend. Yes, it's had huge problems in the past, but diplomatically, business terms, sport terms, Pakistan is a great country, and the royals, as part of the Commonwealth, wanted to show that.
The view from this hill would have been quite different when my grandmother, the Queen, first visited over half a century ago. And with successive visits by my mother and my father, this view has continued to change, with the city constantly growing, and with it my family's affection for Pakistan.
A successful tour like William and Kate's in Pakistan can make it all look easy, but the royals work hard to maintain their accessible and personable image overseas.
Royal tours are incredibly time-consuming. They are exhausting. I think the royals have a knack of making them look almost like holidays because they're always smiling.
Royal tours do demand a huge amount of acting. If you're not feeling great, if you're feeling a bit off colour, if you just want to watch a bit of TV, if you want to go for a swim in the hotel pool, no, you've got to be up and at 'em at 6 a.m. in the morning, if not earlier, and be like, yeah, you know, jazz hands. Because that interaction is going to be the most important interaction for that person, for that month, if not for the year. If not, they might still be talking about it for the rest of their lives.
The royal family have effect on people. They never forget it. They never forget the time they met Prince William. And the family will never forget it. If there's a picture of it, it will be in the family archives forever. And they're aware of that. They're aware of that. And I'm aware of that. So if I see some picture like that, I'll get their email address and I'll send them the picture because I know how important it is to them.
And it's not just the public who are besotted. Some of the world's most powerful people seem equally impressed by the royal family.
When they go to business receptions, it is noticeable how all of these titans of industry, who never wait for anything, will just line up waiting to meet the Queen's grandchild, to meet Harry or to meet William or Meghan and Kate as well. So to get business people into a room with the Queen or Prince Charles or Diana or William and Kate, whoever, is a big deal.
There is this fascination with our royal family. It doesn't matter who it is, the crowds do turn out because here we are in the 21st century, and I suppose a monarchy is a bit of an anachronism. But our monarchy is strong, it will remain strong, and given its strength today and the way it evolves, and has evolved over the years, it's likely to be here well into the 22nd century.